my gosh.
Doing that, thank you.
There's people in it. Oh my god, there's so many people in it.
Save your life.
New Mexico officials might try to hide how catastrophically their warning systems failed, but here is what they do not want you to know. On July 8th, nature unleashed something so violent, so sudden, that every safety protocol became a death trap. Within 50 minutes, a gentle mountain stream transformed into a 6-meter-high wall of destruction. Yet this was not just another flood. The burned mountains above Ruidoso had become a ticking time bomb. Hydrophobic soil from last year's fires creating the perfect storm that their million-dollar warning systems simply could not predict. Picture this, a peaceful mountain river in New Mexico, so small you could literally jump across it. Kids playing near the banks, families enjoying a summer afternoon. Then, in less time than it takes to watch a television show, that gentle stream becomes a 6-meter-high wall of death. This is not fiction. This is exactly what happened in Ruidoso, New Mexico, on July 8, 2025, when nature unleashed one of the most devastating flash floods in American history. The numbers alone are staggering. At 1400 hours that Tuesday afternoon, the Rio Ruidoso was flowing at a mere 1.8 feet, about 0.55 meter, ankle-deep water that posed no threat to anyone. But by 1450 hours, emergency gauges were screaming warnings as the river exploded to an unprecedented 6.17 meters. In 50 minutes, the water level multiplied by more than 10 times. The previous record, 4.84 meters, set just last year, was not merely broken, it was obliterated. Caitlin Carpenter was riding her motorcycle through town when the sky suddenly darkened. Within minutes, she found shelter at the Downshift Brewing Company with dozens of other residents. As she pulled out her phone to film the chaos outside, something caught her eye that would haunt her forever. A house, an entire house, floating down what used to be Main Street. Not debris, not furniture, but a complete home with its distinctive turquoise door intact, spinning helplessly in the current like a toy boat in a bathtub. "I have been in that house," Carpenter would later tell reporters, her voice breaking. "I have memories in that house." The home belonged to one of her closest friends' families. Watching it disappear downstream, she could not help but think of all the family photos, the children's drawings on the refrigerator, the lifetime of memories swept away in seconds. Miraculously, the family was not inside, but thousands of others were not so lucky. To understand why Ruidoso was doomed from the moment the first raindrops fell, you need to know about the invisible killer lurking in the mountains above the town. Exactly 1 year and 3 weeks before the flood, on June 17, 2024, 2 massive wildfires erupted on the Mescalero Apache Reservation. The South Fork Fire and the Salt Fire would consume over 10,000 hectares, destroy 1,400 structures, and fundamentally alter the landscape in ways that proved catastrophic. But the real damage was not visible to the naked eye. When fire burns that hot, forestry officials describe these blazes as explosive. It does not just destroy vegetation, it fundamentally changes the soil itself. The intense heat triggers a chemical reaction that creates what scientists call hydrophobic soil. Imagine pouring water on a hot skillet coated with oil. The water beads up and rolls right off. That is exactly what happened to thousands of hectares of mountainside above Ruidoso. The science is terrifying in its simplicity. Normal soil acts like a sponge, absorbing rainfall and releasing it slowly into streams and groundwater. But hydrophobic soil might as well be concrete. Every drop of rain that hits it immediately runs off, gathering speed and volume as it races downhill. Multiply that effect across 10,000 hectares of burned mountainside, and you have nature's equivalent of a water slide aimed directly at the valley below. On that fateful Tuesday, a monsoon cell stalled directly over the South Fork burn scar. In just 90 minutes, it dumped between 8 and 13 centimeters of rain. Meteorologists called it 5 to 7 times heavier than what the fragile landscape could endure. Picture trying to pour 19 liters of water through a funnel designed for just under 4 liters. The excess must go somewhere, and gravity points only one direction, straight down into Ruidoso. The burned areas were not merely water repellent. They had also been stripped of every tree, bush, and root system that normally holds soil in place. As the water rushed downhill, it picked up everything in its path: ash, mud, burned logs, boulders, and sediment that had accumulated since the fires. This was no longer water, it was a liquid wrecking ball, growing heavier and more destructive with every meter of elevation it lost. Emergency manager Eric Queller later explained that the village had been living on borrowed time. Since the fires in June 2024, Ruidoso had already endured 12 separate flash flood emergencies, not warnings, not watches, emergencies. 13 times in 13 months, residents scrambled for higher ground as water rushed through their streets. Each flood left the soil more eroded, the channels more defined, and the next disaster more likely. It was like playing Russian roulette with nature, and on July 8th, the chamber finally held a bullet. The preparation efforts tell their own story of frustration. The village spent $16.8 million on flood mitigation after the fires, but it was nowhere near enough. Critical projects remained unfunded, trapped in bureaucratic red tape while the clock ticked toward disaster. Sandbag stations dotting town, resident evacuation drills, even National Guard units positioned nearby. Everyone knew the danger, but knowing and stopping it were two very different things. What made this flood particularly deadly was its speed and timing. Previous floods offered residents at least some warning. Storm cells that built gradually, rain that started light before intensifying. The July 8th storm was different. Weather data show it went from light drizzle to torrential downpour in minutes. By the time the first flood warnings were issued, water was already racing down the mountainsides at speeds approaching 48 kilometers per hour. The first distress call came in at 14:12 hours, a motorist trapped in rapidly rising water near Meckham Drive and Sutterth Drive. Within minutes, the 911 dispatch center was overwhelmed. Calls flooded in faster than operators could answer them. A family screaming from a rooftop, an elderly woman watching water pour through her windows, children clinging to tree branches as the current tried to pull them under. This was no longer a rescue operation. It was a battle against time, and time was winning. Fire Chief Cade Hall would later describe it as the most chaotic scene of his career. We had people in trees, we had people in the water, people just trapped in houses with water coming into them. You name it, we were having to address it. Even as he spoke those words to reporters, the weight of what they had faced was evident in his eyes. How do you choose who to save first when everyone needs saving right now? The Gavilan Trailer Park became ground zero for the rescue efforts. First responders arrived to find a scene from a disaster movie. Mobile homes twisted and stacked like crushed soda cans, cars flipped upside down, and somewhere in that mess, the screams of trapped residents. Water was still rising, now carrying deadly debris, propane tanks, electrical transformers, entire trees with their root systems intact. Every rescue attempt meant dodging these lethal projectiles while fighting a current strong enough to sweep away a fire truck. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez of the Ruidoso Fire Department found himself making impossible decisions. We had a team trying to reach a family of 5 in a trailer that was already shifting off its foundation, he recalled. At the same time, we're getting reports of kids trapped in a car 2 blocks away. You save who you can reach, and you pray for the ones you can't. His team managed to pull the family from the trailer just seconds before it was swept away entirely, but the image of that home disappearing downstream would haunt him for months. The New Mexico National Guard's helicopter crews became angels in the storm. Flying in conditions that would normally ground all aircraft, severe turbulence, near zero visibility, debris flying through the air, they performed 9 dramatic aerial rescues. One pilot, Chief Warrant Officer James Martinez, described hovering over a house while his crew chief lowered a rescue basket to a family trapped on their roof. The water was rising so fast, we could actually see it climbing the walls as we worked. Another 5 minutes and that roof would have been underwater. In disasters, numbers can numb us. 3 dead. It sounds so clinical, so small compared to the scale of destruction. Yet behind each number was a life full of dreams, a family destroyed, a future erased in minutes. The flood did not just take lives. It stole stories that were still being written, and none more heartbreaking than the Trotter family tragedy. Charlotte Trotter was 4 years old. Her favorite color was purple, she collected stuffed unicorns, and she had just learned to write her name. Her brother Sebastian, 7, was obsessed with Pokemon cards and dreamed of becoming a professional soccer player. On July 8th, their parents, Sebastian Sr. and Stephanie, had taken them camping at the Riverside RV Park in Ruidoso, a special vacation while their father was on leave from Fort Bliss. They were supposed to be making memories. Instead, they became one. When the flood hit the RV park, it came without mercy. Witnesses described a wall of water, brown and roaring, that did not flow so much as explode through the campground. The Trotter family's RV was among the first hit. Sebastian Sr., a trained soldier, immediately grabbed his children while Stephanie tried to gather their belongings. But there was no time. The water ripped the door off their RV and poured in like a liquid avalanche. What happened next would be pieced together from survivor accounts and the evidence left behind. Sebastian Sr. managed to push Charlotte into her mother's arms before the current caught him and Sebastian Jr. He was last seen holding his son above the water, fighting the current with everything he had. Stephanie, clutching Charlotte, was swept in a different direction. For a few seconds, she could hear her husband shouting their names above the roar. Then nothing. Stephanie Trotter would survive, pulled from the water a quarter-mile downstream by a rescue team, her arms still locked around Charlotte even though her daughter was already gone. She had multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, and hypothermia, but the physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional trauma. Sebastian Sr. was found hours later, unconscious and barely alive, lodged against a bridge support. He had fought the current for nearly 2 miles. In the hospital, as Sebastian Sr. drifted in and out of consciousness, he kept asking for his children. Nurses did not have the heart to tell him the truth, that Charlotte's body had been found that evening, 2 miles from the RV park, her purple unicorn backpack still strapped to her shoulders, that Sebastian Jr. would not be found until the next morning, his precious Pokemon card collection scattered along the riverbank like cruel breadcrumbs marking his final journey. Their aunt, Tiffany Wyatt, would later share what the world had lost. Sebastian was teaching Charlotte to play soccer. She'd follow him everywhere, copying everything he did. He was protective of her but also her best friend. They were planning to put on a magic show for their parents that night. Sebastian had been practicing card tricks for weeks. The magic show that never happened, the soccer games never played, the birthdays never celebrated, these are the true measures of tragedy. But the Trotter children were not the flood's only victims. Benjamin, Timmy, Fegan had a different story but an equally heartbreaking end. At 64, he had just retired from a lifetime of hard work and moved to Ruidoso to live his dream. All his life, Timmy had wanted to be a cowboy. Growing up in the city, watching westerns with his grandfather, he had promised himself that someday he would live in the mountains, wear boots and a hat, maybe even learn to ride. The morning after the flood, as search teams picked through the wreckage, the true scale of devastation became horrifyingly clear. Where neighborhoods once stood, there was now only mud, debris, and the skeletal remains of homes stripped to their foundations. The official count would eventually reach 50 homes destroyed or severely damaged, but that sterile number could not capture what residents saw when they returned to survey the damage. Paradise Canyon, once one of Ruidoso's most picturesque neighborhoods, looked like a war zone. Houses had not merely been flooded, they had been weaponized. The Carpenter family's 2-story home had been lifted off its foundation and used as a battering ram against their neighbors' houses, creating a domino effect of destruction down the entire street. Sarah Carpenter, no relation to Caitlin, stood in what used to be her living room, now open to the sky, pointing to a mud line on the only remaining wall. "That's 15 feet high, about 4.6 meters, she said, her voice hollow. "The water was 15 feet deep in my living room. How do you even process that?" The infrastructure damage defied comprehension. Bridges that had stood for decades were simply gone, leaving jagged concrete stumps jutting from the riverbanks like broken teeth. The main road bridge, a vital connector for the community, had been snapped in half. Its center section found a quarter-mile downstream, wrapped around what was left of the Riverside gas station. Power lines lay tangled in trees like deadly Christmas decorations, transforming entire neighborhoods into no-go zones. Yet it was the small details that broke people's hearts. In the mud outside what had been Riverside Elementary School, rescuers found hundreds of children's drawings, homework assignments, and library books scattered like confetti. A wedding dress, still in its protective bag, hung from a branch 6 meters off the ground. Family photo albums, their images bleeding together into unrecognizable smears, littered the streets. These were not just possessions, they were memories, histories, irreplaceable pieces of lives now literally washed away. The Gavilan Trailer Park, home to many of Ruidoso's working families, had ceased to exist. Where 47 mobile homes once housed nearly 200 people, there was now only a field of twisted metal and splintered wood. Maria Gonzalez, who had lived there for 12 years, found her home's remains 200 yards from its original location. "Everything we owned, everything we had worked for," she said, sifting through mud-caked debris. "My daughter's quinceañera dress, my mother's jewelry from Mexico, our family Bible, all gone. How do you start over from nothing at my age?" The flood had turned ordinary objects into weapons of destruction. Propane tanks became torpedoes, punching through walls and exploding on impact. Cars and trucks, picked up by the current, were hurled against buildings with enough force to collapse entire structures. One particularly haunting image showed a pickup truck embedded in the second-story wall of the Ruidoso Public Library, its front end protruding into what had been the children's reading room. In the aftermath of tragedy, the questions came fast and fierce. How could a flood this deadly strike a community that knew it was at risk? Why did 3 people die when warning systems were supposedly in place? The timeline of July 8th, when examined closely, revealed a series of small failures that added up to catastrophe, and sparked a controversy that would divide the community for months to come. The National Weather Service had issued a flood watch for the South Central Mountains, including Ruidoso, at 0246 hours, nearly 12 hours before the disaster struck. But a flood watch is like a yellow traffic light. It suggests caution, not immediate danger. Most residents, exhausted from 12 previous flood emergencies that year, saw the watch and went about their normal routines. We had been under flood watches for weeks, explained local resident Tom Martinez. It was like crying wolf. How were we supposed to know this one was different? The crucial window was between 1400 and 1412 hours. In those 12 minutes, the storm intensified from moderate rain to a torrential downpour. The automated gauge at Hollywood registered the spike, but there was a delay in processing the data. By the time the National Weather Service upgraded to a flash flood warning at 1412 hours, water was already racing down the mountainsides at lethal speeds. The warning itself used language later criticized as inadequate, considerable flooding possible. Possible. Not imminent. Not life-threatening. Possible. The wireless emergency alert system, designed to send warnings directly to cell phones, activated at 1358 hours for the Upper Canyon area and 1419 hours for downtown Ruidoso. But cell tower congestion meant many messages arrived late or not at all. James Wilson, who lost his home on Cedar Creek, showed investigators his phone. The emergency alert had arrived at 1447 hours, by which time his house was already floating downstream. The warning came after I was standing on my roof, he said bitterly. Real helpful. Yet the most controversial decision was the one not to activate Ruidoso's outdoor warning sirens. These sirens, installed after previous floods, were designed to alert everyone regardless of cell phone coverage. Mayor Lynn Crawford defended the choice at a heated town meeting. The outdoor warning system is reserved for full town evacuations. This event did not warrant that level of response based on the information we had at the time. The room erupted. 3 people are dead, someone shouted from the back. How is that not warrant enough? Emergency manager Eric Queller found himself in the hot seat, fielding aggressive questions from reporters and residents alike. His explanation was technical but unsatisfying. Localized flooding does not trigger community-wide evacuation protocols. We followed our established procedures based on the best available data. But those procedures, written for gradual flooding events, had not anticipated a wall of water moving at highway speeds. The protocols were fighting the last war while a new kind of enemy attacked. The controversy deepened when internal emails were released showing confusion within the emergency management structure. At 1403 hours, a spotter had reported catastrophic rainfall over the burn scar. That report took 9 minutes to reach decision makers. Another email showed Public Works requesting evacuation orders for riverside areas at 1415 hours, a request not approved until 1431 hours. By then, those areas were already underwater. Each delay was defensible in isolation but deadly in combination. The floodwaters had barely receded when Ruidoso residents realized a horrifying truth. This was not an ending, it was a beginning. Since the South Fork and Salt fires stripped the mountains bare in June 2024, the village has endured 13 flash flood emergencies in 13 months. Each storm, each flood, each emergency carved deeper channels through the town, making the next disaster more likely and more deadly. Ruidoso is not merely recovering from a flood, it is trapped in a cycle of destruction that shows no sign of ending. The numbers tell a story of mounting frustration. The village has spent $16.8 million on flood mitigation since the fires, money for sandbags, emergency barriers, channel improvements, early warning systems. Yet critical projects remain stalled in bureaucratic purgatory. A $3.2 million detention basin that could have captured much of the July 8th runoff still waits for federal environmental approval. A hillside stabilization project that might have prevented the worst debris flows is mired in a funding dispute between state and federal agencies. Meanwhile, every rainstorm brings fresh terror to a community already on edge. We are not living, we are just surviving between disasters, says Margaret Thompson, whose family rebuilt their home after the 2024 fires only to lose it again to flooding. Every time clouds build over the mountains, my kids start crying. My daughter will not sleep in her bedroom because it is too far from the door. We keep our car packed with emergency supplies. This is not a life, it is a perpetual emergency. The psychological toll is becoming a crisis in its own right. Dr. Patricia Sandoval, working at the overwhelmed Ruidoso Mental Health Center, describes treating an entire community for post-traumatic stress. We are seeing anxiety, depression, survivor's guilt, and what I call anticipatory trauma. People so convinced the next disaster is imminent that they are already feeling the emotional effects. Children draw pictures of houses floating away. Adults self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. Divorce rates spike as families crack under the pressure of repeated loss and constant fear. Economic devastation compounds the emotional trauma. Many residents exhausted their insurance coverage rebuilding after the fires, only to face flood damage their policies did not cover. Banks are reluctant to lend for repairs in what they now classify as an extreme risk zone. Property values have plummeted, homes that sold for $400,000 before the fires are now worth less than $150,000, if buyers can be found at all. The cruel mathematics of disaster means many families now owe more on their mortgages than their destroyed homes are worth. As monsoon season stretches ahead through September, meteorologists deliver news that feels like a death sentence. This is the new normal. Climate change has not merely made extreme weather more likely, it has fundamentally altered the patterns that governed life in the Southwest for centuries. Dr. Amanda Richardson of the National Climate Assessment Team does not mince words. What Ruidoso is experiencing is a preview of what many communities will face. Fire followed by flood, disaster compounding disaster. The climate has changed, and it is not changing back. The statistics are sobering. 90% of United States cities have experienced increases in extreme rainfall events since 1970. In the Southwest, the increase is even more dramatic. Rainfall intensity has jumped 23% in just the last decade. But it is not only about more rain, it is about where and how it falls. Climate models show monsoons becoming more erratic, more concentrated, more violent. Instead of gentle rains spread across weeks, the same total water now falls in hours, overwhelming any landscape, especially one scarred by fire. The 2-year timeline for burn scar recovery feels like a prison sentence. Hydrophobic soil does not heal quickly. It takes seasons of freeze-thaw cycles, gradual vegetation return, and biological processes to restore the Earth's ability to absorb water. Yet each flood washes away new seedlings and freshly deposited soil, resetting the recovery clock. Some experts privately wonder whether true recovery is even possible under the new climate reality. We might be looking at permanent alteration of this landscape, admits one Forest Service scientist off the record. These mountains might never be safe for downstream communities again. Economic projections are equally grim. A state university study suggests that without massive intervention, Ruidoso will lose 60% of its population within 5 years. The tourist economy, already battered by fires and floods, cannot survive if visitors fear for their safety. Who will vacation in a disaster zone? The ripple effects would devastate the entire region. Lost jobs, closed businesses, abandoned homes becoming blight that further depresses property values in a downward spiral of community collapse. Perhaps the most chilling revelation is how unprepared the rest of America is for similar compound disasters. Ruidoso is not unique, it is merely first. Across the West, millions live below fire-prone mountains. Every community nestled in a valley beneath forested peaks is potentially one wildfire away from Ruidoso's fate. The insurance industry is already adjusting, with major companies pulling out of high-risk areas entirely. Soon, entire regions may become functionally uninhabitable, not because people cannot live there, but because they cannot afford to rebuild over and over again. Proposed technological solutions feel simultaneously futuristic and futile. Engineers suggest massive catchment basins carved into mountainsides, but at costs exceeding $100 million. Hydrologists propose channel modifications that would turn the Rio Ruidoso into a concrete sluiceway, sacrificing its character to save the town. Some even raise the radical idea of cloud seeding to keep rain from falling on burn scars, redirecting storms to safer areas. Yet no one wants to admit the simplest solution: abandoning the valley entirely.